Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is Generation X Politics. This video is sponsored by contribution from Eric. Eric gave a general contribution, which I'm going to use for this video. I've explained before on this channel, I'm not a conservative anymore. I have conservative leanings. I have obviously conservative ideology, but I am not a conservative. I am what is known as an anti-communist. And I've talked about this before, that when people call the left fascists, when they call Biden a fascist, when they call any of these Democrats or these leftists fascists, that is incorrect. That is not what they are. They are communists. And I've explained that fascism rises out of a response to communism. Without communism, there would be no fascism. Now, that's different than Nazism. Yes, Nazism is a form of fascism, but it was a completely separate and more brutal, and when they're pulling off genocides. And what I have here is a video from Konstantin Kisin. He's runs the channel Trigonometry. I like him a lot. I don't agree with him on everything. He was born in the ex-Soviet Union. He's a Brit. He lives in Britain now, so he's a British subject, and he's really smart. He's brilliant. And what I got here is about an 8-minute video of him explaining the differences between communism and fascism and why communism is actually worse. So let's just get into it right now, shall we?
Why communism is even worse than fascism. I'm aware that if you follow our channel, you understand nuance and complexity, but sadly not everyone does. In view of this, I have to make this disclaimer for those who will inevitably attempt to misrepresent what I'm saying.
Right. None of this is an endorsement of fascism. None of it. So, none of it. All this is to explain how communism is worse than fascism and how fascism rises as a response to it.
Saying in the future. Nothing I'm about to say is intended to serve as a defense of fascism. Arguing about whether fascism is better than communism is like fighting over your preferred flavor of gangrene. I merely ask that those of you who abhor fascism as much as I do are also willing to be intellectually honest and recognize the fact that communism is in fact even worse. I met a Bulgarian man in an Amsterdam cafe earlier this week. He recognized me and we talked about many things. He asked me if I'd seen Chernobyl, the HBO miniseries, and I said no, because I hate watching stuff everyone's banging on about.
If you haven't seen Chernobyl, it's only a 4-part miniseries. Each one's like about an hour long. It's brilliant. It really is. It's a brilliant show, and it perfectly encapsulates the arrogance and the stupidity and the brutality of communism. And if you watch that, if you watch Chernobyl, you will see the exact same attitudes and behaviors that you're seeing in Western governments now and most of the Western media these days.
He said, I know what you mean, but you must watch it because it perfectly captures the society we lived in, where fear and cowardice triumphs over truth. I watched Chernobyl the day I got home, and he's right. The series is so authentic, it immediately hits you in the gut when you recognize it.
Brilliant.
But he also told me a fascinating story about his country that I was not aware of. The man who eventually became the first president of Bulgaria when the USSR collapsed, Zelle, was a dissident during Soviet times who was expelled from the Communist Party and made unemployable for years. Eventually, in 1982, he wrote a book called Fascism, in which he chronicled the fascist regimes in Spain, Italy, and Germany before, during, and after World War II. Was this a ploy to curry favor with the Communist Party by criticizing its enemies? Not exactly. The book was banned within weeks of publication because the similarities between the societies he described in the book and the one he lived in were far too striking to ignore. The parallels between these two collectivist ideologies are of course exceedingly obvious. Spawned during the same time period as a response to the same problem, and offering many of the same solutions, communists and fascists had stark differences, but on economics in particular, Hitler's National Socialists were not as different to other kinds of socialists as people would like to believe. The reasons for this historical revisionism differ from country to country. In Russia, where I come from, a law passed in 2014 criminalized any meaningful comparison between the crimes of the Soviet Union and the exact same crimes committed by Nazi Germany.
Right, because they don't want you to realize fascism rose as a response to communism. And they don't want you to, because, and I've said this a lot. The triggering phrase used to be Hitler at least got the trains to run on time. And they hate that because that phrase just opens up a door to exactly what communism is. It destroys everything. It destroys everything it touches, every business, every art, music, all of it. It creates nothing. All it knows how to do is destroy. As brutal and as horrible as the Nazis were in Germany, Germany was a beautiful place to live. Germany had a culture. They had fashion. They had art. They had music. Now, a lot of it you couldn't go over what the Nazis wanted, and you couldn't speak out against Nazism. They didn't have free speech, but there was culture. There was beauty. Even in Mussolini's fascist Italy, it was a beautiful place. There was culture. There was art. There was music. There was fashion. The communists destroy everything. They can run nothing. Nobody was starving in Italy. Nobody was starving in Germany. They weren't. People starve under communism. That's why when they say, well, Hitler got the trains to run on time, what they were saying was it was a more effective form of government than communism, which it is, and it was. That's not an endorsement of it. It's just a fact. So that's why, this is what the communist, the Marxist fears the most. This is why they call everybody they disagree with a Nazi, because they fear fascism. They know what the consequences of their policies, which are eventually going to lead to. And it's not Nazism that they have to worry about. It's not the rise of the next Hitler. It's the rise of the next General Franco. Franco is coming. General Franco, the fascist takeover in Spain was a direct consequence, was a direct reaction to the communists that are trying to take over Spain. The burning of churches, the crucifying and rape of nuns and priests, the destruction of culture is what led to the rise of General Franco. General Franco didn't pull off a genocide. General Franco destroyed the communists, and that's what they fear more than anything.
As a result, most people in Russia, and frankly elsewhere, have no idea that when Hitler started World War II by invading Poland, he wasn't alone. The Soviet Union invaded Poland at exactly the same time, capturing more territory than the Germans.
Which is now, and I've always said this about Ukraine, which was a part of Ukraine. Ukraine was a part of Poland until that happened. See, that's what everybody seems to forget. The only country that has a real legitimate claim over Ukraine is Poland. Even though in the southern Donbass and all that, they're all Russian speaking now, that was all Poland. And that was when the communists and the Nazis were, in 1939, were allies.
This was the product of an explicit, albeit secret, agreement between Hitler and Stalin in which they divided Eastern Europe as they saw fit, something called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Ironically, in Russia, which experienced communism firsthand, the comparison between communism and fascism is not banned in order to defend the ideology of communism, merely to protect the historical view of Russians as a good people who sacrificed millions of lives to stop Hitler, which is of course true. In the West, on the other hand, communism apologists operate from a rather different set of needs. First, despite what historian Roger Morehouse calls the devil's alliance between Nazi Germany and the USSR, Hitler soon stabbed his new friend in the back, and by June 1941, having been invaded, the Soviets, found themselves on the same side as Britain and France, fighting.
And this is my point about Hitler. Hitler didn't hate the United States. Hitler hated the communists. Hitler viewed the communists as dogs. You look at the treatment of American POWs compared to Soviet POWs, night and day. By and large, the American POWs were treated pretty fairly. Were there incidents? Of course there were. Are there incidents in every war? Yeah. The Russians were basically put in internment camps, forced labor camps. They were considered dogs to the Nazis, to the fascists.
Germany. Orwell's magnificent preface to Animal Farm makes clear the corrosive effect this necessary alliance had on the West's ability to criticize communism. You may be familiar with the following Orwell quote. "I'm well acquainted with all the arguments against freedom of thought and speech, the arguments which claim that it cannot exist, and the arguments which claim that it ought not to. I answer simply that they don't convince me, and that our civilization over a period of 400 years has been founded on the opposite notice." What you likely aren't familiar with is the sentence that followed it, which was, "For quite a decade past, I have believed that the existing Russian regime is a mainly evil thing, and I claim the right to say so, in spite of the fact that we are allies with the USSR in a war which I want to see won."
And understand something. Both Patton and MacArthur had basically the same quote. We defeated the wrong enemy, because they understood that. Now, do I necessarily agree with that? No, because you can't allow a genocide. Without a genocide, you know what? We probably would have been better off with siding with Germany at that point, because Hitler's main focus was stopping the spread of communism, as was Japan. Japan was terrified of communism. They had wanted no damn part of it.
The argument for preventing this sort of sentiment from being aired was simple. We needed the Soviet Union to win the war, and shutting up Stalin's critics was a price worth paying. In other words, some whitewashing.
And the sad thing is, if the United States had stayed out of World War I, there never would have been a Hitler. There never would have been a Weimar Republic. There never would have been a World War II in the form it's in. We might have ended up going to war directly with the Soviet Union.
Of communist crimes is a product of practical considerations, but not all. There were, and I can tell you from direct personal experience, still are many people in Western societies who are temperamentally inclined towards the allure of radical socialism. As they see the negative trade-offs of capitalism, their instincts for compassion, empathy, and care kick into overdrive.
And here's the thing, when you hear socialism, real communism, real socialism has never been tried, when they're saying that, everybody thinks as long as they're in charge, they can do it better. And they can't, because you're not going to defeat human nature. The temptation for corruption and power is just too strong.
Combined with an idealism which blinds them to the sad truth of life that any society will always have unsolvable problems, they see only the flaws in their own and assume that the opposite must be better. George Bernard Shaw, for example, loved communism and worshipped Stalin. Walter Duranty of the New York Times won a Pulitzer Prize for his fraudulent coverage of the Holodomor and widespread famine in the Soviet Union, in which millions starved to death, including...
I mean, look at that. I mean, this looks like, at one time, was a nice town, was a nice place to live. Cobbled streets, sidewalks, picket fences, shrubbery, build nice looking architecture and buildings, people dead right in front of the picket fences. This is what communism does. It destroys everything it touches. And this is the road we're heading down, people.
Members of my own family. I won't waste your time with more examples. We all know some on the left cover for communism because they believe in it, or want to believe it hasn't been tried properly. Nor will I give you the standard anti-communist talking points about the death toll from communist regimes, which far exceeds those of any other ideology. I won't remind you that Che Guevara, whose face is an ever-present symbol of resistance around the world, was in fact nothing more than a racist, homophobic mass murderer. Above and beyond these very real atrocities, the true horror of the communist system was something that went beyond its material impact. As my newly made Bulgarian friend told me, Bulgaria has a difficult history, he said, constantly invaded, occupied by the Ottomans for centuries, and we always bounced back, but we still haven't recovered from communism. Why? Because while fascism is nationalistic, totalitarian, and collectivist, it does not aspire to dominate the lives of ordinary citizens to anything like the same extent.
Right.
Communism, remember, rejected the idea of private property, private enterprise, or indeed a private life of any kind. In the Soviet Union, you were explicitly told to put the interests of the state above not only your own, but those of your loved ones. If you read my book and...
Right. The fascists, the Nazis, they weren't trying to tell you you couldn't own a home. They weren't trying to control the food supply. They weren't trying to starve their own people. Communists have killed way more people than the Nazis ever did, or fascism ever has.
Immigrant's Love Letter to the West, you'll remember the story of Pavlik Morozov, a boy who reported his own father to the authorities and was held up as a national hero. Fascism was...
Communism loves reporting people. Like the last story I just did on the LGBT kids, middle schoolers. What are they trying to set up? They're trying to set up an anonymous snitch line to snitch out your fellow students. This is what communism breeds. This is what's here. Don't buy this. It's Democrats. It's democratic socialism. It's communism. Woke is communism.
Almost as evil as communism, to be sure, but it did not attempt to achieve its aims by stealing and redistributing private property, seizing your business, or installing a new tyrannical hierarchy under the pretense of eradicating it. The fear and deceit you see depicted so accurately in the Chernobyl miniseries is a product of a society that has fundamentally broken the will of its own people. The drive to better your own life, to see your children prosper and thrive.
Which is what they're trying to do now. They're trying to break the will of people who have conservative viewpoints, anti-communist viewpoints, people who are trying to protect Western culture. That's what you're seeing through these corrupt judges, these corrupt prosecutors, with these corrupt cases, sending people to jail for 20 years for a protest, while they in turn burn down cities, while they torch police stations, while they light police cars on fire.
Create and build things worthy of notice and admiration. All of these were beaten, starved, and tortured out of the people who had the misfortune to live under communist regimes. So yes, communist societies did kill, starve, rape, and torture more people than the fascists, but they also engaged in the totalitarianism of the mind, of the kind that not even Hitler aspired to. It is for this reason, above all others, that those of us who lived under communism, or come from families that did, reject so strongly the modern trend in which ideology is elevated above truth, political correctness is prioritized over facts, and the powers that be increasingly seek to control not only what we do, but also what we think.
And there you have it. Hence why communism is worse than fascism. And understand, I'll say this again, none of this is an endorsement of fascism, but understand where their fear is, why they keep calling everybody Nazis, because they realize that fascism rises up out of communism as a response. But it's not the Nazis they should be worried about. It's the next General Franco. Because Franco said, enough's enough, we're destroying these communists. They're not going to destroy our culture. We're not going to let them burn churches. We're not going to let them rape and crucify nuns and priests and religious people. We're just not. So, I am not a conservative. I am an anti-communist. And I strongly recommend, if you really want to know, if you really want to see it, how sick that Marxist ideology is and what we're heading to, watch the miniseries Chernobyl. because it does. It encapsulates it perfectly. So I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank Eric for the contribution. I really appreciate it. And thank everybody who's watching. Please leave any opinions in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, something you'd like me to expose, you'd like to set up a Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all of this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with either the Cash App, Zelle, PayPal, and email links in the description box below. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. Also, be sure to subscribe to both my Rumble channels. Follow me on Twitter and Telegram as well. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been Generation X Politics. Take care, everyone.